Hey there, I'm Michael Mingai, and I'm going to talk briefly about trunk-based development and why overbranching can kill your productivity. First things first, what is trunk-based development? And I'm going to compare it to an alternative called feature-based branching. Top part of this diagram is a trunk-based model. You can see each feature is branched off briefly and reintegrated. Down below you see feature-based, where the features run for a longer period of time and they're not reintegrated until they're ready. They both of these diagrams represent 5 independent features, but we can see that one of them has significant more complexity in it. And this is part of what people miss on the overhead of feature-based branching. There's significant more effort to keep the branches all in sync. And trying to predict which branches should be merged together can get very difficult, and it's an end to the end problem to figure out what all the different combinations are, and QA and testing it is nearly impossible. Often, what you see with these when folks are using feature-based branching inappropriately, there are mysterious timeline and cost overruns that nobody can really account for. Developers said they were done 6 months ago, but bugs pop up at the last minute, right before a release. One thing I'll say is if you're using a trunk-based model, you almost have to have, unless you have a very small team and a very discrete timeline, some sort of ability to decouple deploying code from releasing it to customers, just because not everyone's ever going to finish at the same time. And it becomes important to be able to switch that at runtime without redeploying code. So you can, when the feature's ready, enable it in your QA environment, QA test it, and then whenever everyone says we're good to go, you just flip it on in production. So now, when would you use trunk-based branching? I'm going to say most e-commerce sites, corporate type web development shops, probably should almost always use it. And a little bit on the history, there was a push a while back, and especially with Git, to use more of because branching was much easier than earlier tools like RCS, CVS, SVN. There was a proliferation of using branches for everything because it was really quick and fast, but it wasn't easy, and developers sometimes forget about the reintegration effort because they think they're done when they've committed and pushed their code. But when to use trunk based? If you're working on a single product, right? There's only one environment, production environment, right? If you're working on, I don't know, I'll just make something up, cars.com. There's only cars.com, right? You're not shipping that as a library to other people or other reasons that might make feature branching more important. I'll talk about that in a minute. If you really care about the timeline and the effort involved with the release, getting code into production, you have a strategy for decoupling deploying code into an environment from releasing it and making it available. If you've already got that, there's really no good reason to branch, right? If your teams are all aligned on the same sort of product roadmap and set of goals and overall functionality, and if you're using continuous integration, deployment, and delivery, and those are goals you care about, you've got sort of business value behind that sort of rapid and agile delivery method, trunk base is probably the way to go. So that having been said, when would you want to use feature branching? Well, I think a good example of when this really makes sense is if you have a product, especially if it's based on specific hardware, say an avionics software that's in, you know, 20 really expensive airplanes, and there are multiple versions of the hardware as the industry evolves, and you can't always retrofit the plane to the new hardware that can use the new code, but they might have shared components or libraries. If you're working in those components and libraries, you're going to likely have to maintain multiple branches over very long periods of time. So if you're in that mode, trunk based can still be done, but to the second point here, the amount of effort to build the right level of switching and sort of customized builds might be more, especially if you're only reintegrating rarely, than just living with branches and the reintegration effort. You don't have this desire or need to continuously integrate the code, into the shared code base that's used in one place. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Like if not a goal, like in my avionics example, I mean, CI is still a good idea, maybe, but each branch might have their own CI pipelines, and they might live for years or decades. Another time you might want to consider, or it might actually be necessary, even in the sort of the product-based organizations or in e-commerce organizations, if you have a significant architectural change that, to my earlier point, just is difficult to support with switches. The underlying database is changing. The libraries that you're using are significantly different. You might have to live with a branch. Now, generally, this is an exception, not a rule, for most digital product-based organizations. But it's something to consider. Like you can't always use one or the other method. I just wanted to call out a little bit, like when and why you might want to use one approach over the other. There is no, holy grail, the best way to do for everyone. What I do see a lot of times, though, is folks either shift between organizations that have different goals and they sort of drag along, well, I always did it this way and it was good in this context, and they forget that this decision is contextual and it's based on your goals. So hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to reach out and let me know if you have any comments or you want me to go through anything else. Thanks.